The breakup that made me dangerous in a good way, the first crack came silently, almost imperceptibly. I should have noticed it the late texts. The fleeting looks that carried unspoken words, but I didn't. Not until the night of the gallery opening. When the city lights bled into the glass panes of the building, casting elongated shadows across the polished floors. That night, I realized Jordan had changed. Or maybe I had. Either way, the reflection in the mirrored wall didn't match the image I thought I knew. Jordan laughed. It's a kind of easy, careless laugh that once drew me in like a moth to flame. But tonight it landed wrong. Somewhere between the clinking of wine glasses and the muted chatter of patrons. I noticed the way Jordan's eyes darted toward someone else across the room, a stranger I had never met. Yet one who seemed to command Jordan's attention effortlessly. I told myself it was nothing. I traced the rim of my glass with my finger, feeling the condensation bead and drip, thinking maybe I was just imagining things. But deep down, that nagging whisper at the edge of my mind screamed that something was about to shatter. It wasn't long before the truth crashed in like a cold wave in the middle of summer. Later that night, after the crowd thinned and the neon signs outside flickered against the wet asphalt, I received the text. Short, clipped, and entirely devoid of warmth. I think we need to take a break. I stared at the screen, unable to comprehend how those 6 words could dismantle the life I had been building. The words carried an echo of betrayal, a sting that no apology could soften. A break. After years of promises, laughter, and plans scribbled on napkins in coffee shops, a break was not a neutral space. It was a doorway to the end. I remember pacing my apartment that night, the city humming below my window like an indifferent witness. Rain began to tap against the glass, rhythmic and insistent, as if the universe itself were mourning with me. The room smelled faintly of the takeout I had left half-eaten on the counter. A reminder that even sustenance felt meaningless now. My hands shook not with anger, though there was plenty, but with a kind of raw, unfiltered hurt that makes you question every memory you've cherished. I thought back to the first time we met. In a downtown art studio surrounded by unfinished canvases and the scent of turpentine, Jordan had smiled at me in that way that made the world feel smaller, safer, intimate. Back then, I'd believed in forever, at least in the kind of loyalty that doesn't falter under pressure, and now I was left with a gaping emptiness, a hollow in my chest that seemed impossible to fill. Sleep didn't come that night. Not really. I drifted between consciousness and memory, replaying our conversations, our fights, our laughter. Every minor slight, every tender word, every casual look gained weight in the darkness. My pride warred with my grief. Part of me wanted to storm out and demand answers. Another part wanted to curl up and let the hurt consume me entirely. By morning, I had realized something crucial. Heartbreak is deceptively quiet. It doesn't always scream or throw dishes across rooms. Sometimes it creeps in softly, invisibly, until it's impossible to ignore. And when you finally acknowledge it, you are left with a choice. Succumb to it or rise from it. That choice came unexpectedly. I found myself walking the city streets before dawn, the air crisp and sharp. Neon billboards still glowed faintly, casting color across the slick pavement. I passed shuttered cafes and empty plazas, and with each step, I felt a small ignition within me. Something primal, fierce, unyielding. A whisper that said, "They think this hurts you. They have no idea what they just unleashed." I didn't know what it meant yet. I didn't understand how that pain could be turned into power. But the spark was there, coiled and waiting. And for the first time since the breakup, I felt a shift, not despair, not sadness, not the weak kind of longing that leaves you paralyzed. No, this was different. This was dangerous. And in that moment, with the city still asleep, I made a silent promise. I would rise. I would become someone unstoppable, someone untouchable, someone who no one could disregard or underestimate again. Not because I sought revenge, but because I had finally realized my own worth. Little did I know, the journey from heartbreak to danger was just beginning. Each step would test me, push me, and transform me in ways I could never have anticipated. And by the time the world recognized the new me, it wouldn't just be a statement of survival, it would be a declaration. I was dangerous. But in the best way possible, the days after the breakup blurred into one another. Work became a fog of meaningless emails and endless meetings, but beneath it all, I felt a subtle pulse of change. The city outside my window didn't pause for grief. It moved, relentless and unflinching. And maybe that's what drew me out, seeing everyone else live. Breathe, achieve, while I had felt stuck in a pause button I didn't press. I started small. Morning runs through the urban park. The sound of my own feet pounding pavement, keeping time with a heartbeat that refused to slow. Each drop of sweat felt like a confession and a vow. I will not be defined by this heartbreak. I will not allow someone else's choice to dictate the limits of my potential. Samira noticed the change first. My best friend had been a constant in the shadows of my despair, offering little more than a watchful eye and a truth I often didn't want to hear. "You're acting like you're broken," she had said one evening as we shared late-night takeout over the kitchen counter, the smell of fried chicken and roasted vegetables filling the air. "But you're not. You're dangerous. Once you stop mourning what you lost and start claiming what's yours, people will notice. And Jordan, they won't know what hit them." I stared at her, almost angry. Dangerous? The word felt audacious, almost unreal. But there was a spark in her eyes that mirrored something I had long forgotten. The certainty of my own worth. I didn't know where it would lead. I only knew that every choice I made after that night mattered. The gym became a sanctuary, not for vanity, but for discipline. I took night classes, immersing myself in areas I had always wanted to master: photography, finance, public speaking. Every skill learned, every small success. It felt like a brick in the wall I was building around my newfound identity. Then came the social experiments, subtle but calculated. I attended events I would have once avoided, mingling with people I had admired from a distance. I watched reactions, studied dynamics, and discovered something remarkable. Confidence was magnetic. When I spoke, listened, or merely stood in a room with composure, eyes drawn to me as if recognition of my energy was instinctive. It wasn't about showing Jordan what I could become. It wasn't revenge. It was self-realization. Every compliment, every impressed glance, reinforced a simple but profound truth. I had underestimated myself before. And no one else's approval could substitute the power that comes from recognizing your own value. One evening, at a downtown charity gala, I noticed Jordan across the room. They were laughing, charming, weaving through the crowd with effortless ease. And yet something had shifted. They paused when our eyes met briefly. I didn't look away, didn't flinch. There was no need. My reflection in the mirrored pillars beside me captured someone unrecognizable to them, person sculpted by pain into strength, refined and radiant. The realization hit me like a wave. I was dangerous. Not in the way people fear, not in a way that sought to destroy, but in the quiet power of self-possession. In the ability to walk into a room and command attention without demanding it, to be so anchored in your own worth that past betrayals became irrelevant. It was intoxicating, yes, but also terrifying. Every compliment, every notice. It felt like a step further from the person I had been, the one who had once waited for validation in someone else's eyes. The part of me that longed for Jordan's approval was fading, replaced by a fiercer, sharper version of myself. At home that night, I sat by the window, watching the city lights ripple across the river. The reflection staring back at me was confident, poised, dangerous, but in a good way. I realized that heartbreak, while excruciating, had been the spark I needed. The betrayal that once threatened to break me had instead catalyzed a metamorphosis I had never anticipated. And the best part? I hadn't sought it. I hadn't planned it. It had emerged organically, quietly, persistently, like a force of nature that no one could ignore. Not even me. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, "This is only the beginning." The transformation was no longer just internal. Subtle changes in posture, in the way I spoke, in how I moved through the world, were being noticed. Opportunities I had once dreamed of now seemed attainable. People listened differently, treated me differently. Doors I had never dared to knock on were opening. Yet beneath it all, there was a simmering thrill, a dangerous edge. Not malicious, but undeniable. A sense that I could handle anything the world or heartbreak threw at me. That power, born from loss and refined through effort, had an unmistakable clarity. I was no longer a victim of circumstance, no longer defined by past affection, and somewhere in the back of my mind, a small, almost imperceptible smile formed. I had discovered something Jordan could never take away: me. It was impossible to ignore the subtle shift. The city hadn't changed, nor had the people around me at least not entirely, but I could feel it in the way the air moved. The way interactions bent slightly toward me, as if I had become the gravity center in a world that had once taken me for granted. Every glance, every hesitant smile, confirmed what I already knew. I was no longer invisible. The first undeniable moment of this new reality came at a gallery opening downtown. I had returned, not because I missed Jordan, because I wanted to see what the night felt like when I no longer needed validation. The crowd was a mixture of old acquaintances and strangers, chatter blending with jazz and the faint clink of champagne flutes, and there, among the throngs, was Jordan. I froze for just a second. The instinct to shrink, to apologize for existing, hovered briefly. Then it disappeared entirely. I walked forward with my shoulders squared, head held high, exuding the kind of quiet authority that makes people pay attention without demanding it. Jordan's eyes met mine. There was a flash of surprise, a flicker of something that had once been confidence but now seemed small. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I simply existed, fully present, and the difference was palpable. It wasn't just Jordan who noticed. Friends, strangers, even acquaintances whose names I didn't remember were drawn into the orbit of this new version of me. I answered questions with precision, spoke with clarity, and laughed on my own terms. Every action, intentional or not, reinforced a simple truth. I had been underestimated before, and I would never allow it again. Later that night, I found myself outside, breathing in the crisp, urban air. Neon reflections rippling in puddles from an earlier rain. I thought about the steps that had brought me here at the early mornings, the classes, the hours of self-reflection. Every moment of pain, every sleepless night, had refined me. And I realized that being dangerous wasn't about intimidation. It was about presence, mastery, and the calm confidence that comes from knowing your own worth. The weeks that followed were a series of small but undeniable victories. At work, a project I had pitched months ago was finally colleagues who had once dismissed my ideas now approached me for guidance. Socially, invitations arrived in unexpected places: a dinner here, a panel discussion there, an opportunity to assert myself without force, to let the world recognize my value organically. And everywhere I went, Jordan's shadow lingered. Sometimes I would catch a glimpse in a cafe window or in passing through the crowded streets. The old ache of longing would flare for a moment, sharp and intrusive, but it was tempered immediately by pride and satisfaction. I didn't need approval anymore. I had created a persona that no one could ignore, a presence that was magnetic and undeniable. It wasn't arrogance. It was survival turned into art. Every choice, every word, every step was deliberate. I learned to control the smallest gestures, the tilt of my head, the pause before I spoke, the confidence in my stride. People noticed. Even when they didn't consciously understand why, the dangerous energy wasn't about seeking revenge or making Jordan pay. It was about self-possession. It's about the thrill of watching the world recognize what had always been there, but had been hidden beneath pain and doubt. I could feel it in the way doors opened, in the way colleagues sought my input. In the subtle way, conversations shifted when I entered a room. I was no longer reactive. I was proactive, commanding attention without demanding it, mastering influence through presence and precision. And yet, with all this growth, there were moments of reflection. Alone at night, city lights spilling across my apartment floor, I sometimes thought about what I had lost. Not Jordan, not exactly, but the innocence, the naive trust I had once given freely. That trust had been fractured, yes, but it had forged a sharper, more resilient version of myself. Pain had become fuel, heartbreak, a catalyst, and what emerged was dangerous, but in a way that could only be good. One evening, Samira and I sat across from each other at our favorite cafe, the low hum of conversation and the aroma of roasted coffee beans filling the air. She looked at me with that familiar spark of recognition. "You've changed," she said. "Completely. I can see it in the way you move, the way people listen when you speak. You're dangerous, and you've never been more alive." I smiled, quietly savoring the truth in her words. There was no gloating, no need for revenge. The danger came from within, from self-respect, clarity, and a confidence so absolute it radiated outward. The kind of danger that commands respect, inspires, and opens doors without demanding entry. By the time I left the cafe, I knew that life would never be the same. Heartbreak had been the doorway to this new existence. The world could no longer underestimate me. And Jordan, if they ever truly saw the transformation, would realize that what they had lost was more than a person. They had lost the force that I had become. The city never slowed, and neither could I. Each morning brought a new challenge, a new opportunity to test the boundaries of my own strength. It wasn't enough to feel dangerous. The world had to acknowledge it, and the recognition was never automatic. It demanded action, presence, and poise in every interaction. Work became a battlefield of influence, strategy, and timing. A project that had once been overlooked now depended entirely on me, my vision, and my ability to execute flawlessly. Colleagues watched, some in awe, others in envy, as I navigated office politics with a deftness I had never possessed before. I realized then that being dangerous was not about brute force. It was subtle, quiet, and uncompromising. Every word measured, every glance intentional. One afternoon, a client arrived late, disheveled and tense, clearly under pressure from corporate oversight. My team hesitated, unsure how to handle the storm. I stepped in, calmly taking control. I listened. I spoke. I orchestrated a solution that solved the problem and restored confidence. By the time the meeting ended, the client was smiling, impressed not just with the solution but with the composure that had carried it. That was the first of many moments where I recognized my power not as someone trying to dominate, but as someone who commanded respect naturally, socially. The transformation was even more apparent. Invitations to events I would have previously declined poured in: networking functions, panels, charity galas. I moved through these spaces with an ease that attracted attention without effort. People listened when I spoke. Their eyes followed my movements. Every interaction was a chance to refine the aura I had cultivated, the dangerous, unstoppable energy that had emerged from Heartbreak. And then, inevitably, Jordan appeared. It wasn't planned. I didn't expect them at the annual City Art Showcase, but there they were, laughing and charming, weaving through the crowd as though the world had always belonged to them. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw that flicker of recognition. That moment of realization that the person they once dismissed had transformed into someone untouchable. I didn't approach. I didn't need to. Presence alone was sufficient. I watched them falter just slightly as they caught glimpses of the confidence, the magnetism, the unshakable aura I had built from the rubble of our past. That subtle unease thrilled me, but not with vindictive pleasure. It was a validation of my own growth, the tangible evidence that Heartbreak had forged something remarkable within me yet. Tests emerged that were not so simple. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers occasionally challenged my authority, unknowingly testing the limits of my patience. Each encounter was a chance to practice restraint, strategy, and poise. Once, during a heated discussion about a collaborative project, a rival attempted to belittle my expertise. I paused, measured my words, and responded with precision and insight. By the end of the exchange, not only had I maintained control, but I had earned respect from those who had doubted me. It was subtle power, but no less intoxicating. There were moments, though, when solitude brought reflection. Late at night, city lights glimmering against rain-soaked streets, I allowed myself brief glimpses of vulnerability. I thought about the early days of Heartbreak, the nights spent pacing in empty apartments, the silent tears that no one witnessed. And I understood that those moments were essential. They had been the crucible in which this version of me had been forged. Pain had been a catalyst, betrayal a forge, and now I wielded the strength it had produced. Even romance, which I had once sought desperately, took on a different form. People noticed, yes, but I no longer needed validation from attraction. The allure I projected was natural, unforced, rooted in authenticity rather than desperation. When someone showed interest, it was on my terms, in alignment with the person I had become, and still. Jordan lingered like a ghost in the periphery. It was inevitable that the past would attempt to intersect with the present. But every encounter, every glance, confirmed the distance I had cultivated not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically. I had grown beyond the need for approval or reconciliation. I had become someone untouchable, someone whose presence alone was enough to command attention, respect, and admiration. The final test arrived unexpectedly during a high-profile gala, a charity event filled with influential figures and media attention. Jordan attempted a casual approach, perhaps seeking reconciliation or validation. I met them not with anger or resentment, but with calm, composed authority. The interaction lasted moments, but it was decisive. I realized then that true danger, the kind that matters, is not rooted in vengeance, but in self-possession, in the ability to navigate the world with absolute confidence and integrity. Walking away from that encounter, I felt a profound sense of triumph, not over Jordan, but over my own limitations, fears, and doubts. I had survived heartbreak, cultivated strength, and discovered a version of myself that the world could no longer ignore. And in that quiet realization, I understood something essential. Being dangerous in a good way was not about dominating others. It was about mastering oneself, and the world inevitably took notice. The gala had been months in the making. An annual event drawing the city's most influential, the movers and shakers, the people who controlled doors and opportunities I had once only dreamed of knocking on. I arrived in silence, letting my presence announce itself. No fanfare, no spectacle, just the calm, composed authority I had honed over months of relentless self-refinement. Jordan was there, of course. They had expected a different person, I knew. The one who would hesitate, stumble, seek validation, or perhaps plead. But that person had been left behind in the rubble of heartbreak. What remained was someone untouchable, magnetic, undeniably dangerous, but in a good way. The room buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the occasional clink of champagne glasses. I moved with purpose, every step deliberate, aware of the ripple my presence caused without effort. Heads turned, whispers floated, and eyes lingered not on my attire, though it was impeccable, but on the aura I radiated. Confidence tempered with warmth, power balanced with approachability. Dangerous, but good. Jordan approached, attempting casual charm. I could see the calculation in their eyes, the mental checklist of how to engage, how to reclaim attention. But I was ahead. Always ahead. I met their gaze steadily, a quiet smile playing at the corner of my lips, not condescending, not cruel, simply aware. "I didn't expect to see you here," Jordan said, the voice just a touch too controlled, betraying an undercurrent of surprise. "And yet here I am," I replied evenly. No emotion wasted. Each word deliberate, measured, commanding. They paused, searching for a crack, a hint of vulnerability. There was none. Jordan's lips pressed into a thin line, and for the first time, saw doubt flicker. Realization that the person they thought they knew no longer existed. The interaction was brief but decisive. I didn't need to speak volumes. Presence had spoken enough. Every observer, every mutual acquaintance, had witnessed the quiet power I wielded effortlessly. The ex who had once held control through charm and manipulation now faced someone composed, radiant, and untouchable. Later, I retreated to a balcony overlooking the city's skyline. The lights shimmered on the river, reflections dancing like memories of who I had been. Samira joined me, handing over a glass of wine, her eyes wide with pride. "They can see it now," she said softly. Everyone can. You're different, stronger, dangerous, in the best way. I sipped the wine, letting the warmth seep through me. She was right. But the thrill wasn't in recognition from others. It was in the understanding that heartbreak had forged this power. Betrayal had been the catalyst, not the foundation. Every late night, every tear, every pang of regret had built the armor I now wore not to protect, but to project. To attract opportunity, respect, and admiration organically. The weeks following the gala confirmed the transformation. Offers, invitations, and opportunities flowed, as if the city itself acknowledged the new me. People sought my input, admired my composure, and deferred to my presence. But it wasn't arrogance that guided MIT, was mastery. Mastery of self, mastery of emotion, mastery of space and interaction. Jordan lingered in the background of my life, occasionally attempting contact, casually mentioning mutual acquaintances or events, but I had long since moved beyond needing validation from them or anyone else. My life was mine, my value unassailable. I had become someone no one could ignore, not through force, but through quiet, deliberate confidence. And yet, moments of reflection still surfaced. Alone, I thought of the nights I had spent devastated, pacing apartments and questioning worth. I smiled faintly, knowing those moments had been necessary. Without them, I would not have discovered the force that now carried me through every room, every street, every challenge. Pain had been a teacher, betrayal, a sculptor, and I had emerged flawless in the ways that truly mattered. One evening, as the sun dipped behind skyscrapers and painted the city gold, I stood on my apartment balcony, looking out at a world that seemed both familiar and entirely new. I whispered to myself, a quiet affirmation that resonated deep in my chest. I am dangerous. In a good way, it was more than a statement. It was a declaration. Heartbreak had been my crucible, and from it, I had forged not just survival, but mastery. Jordan had tried to define my limits, but I had discovered infinite possibility. And in that realization, I found a freedom that no betrayal could ever touch. The city was quiet that morning, a rare pause in its constant hum. I stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching sunlight dance off the glass facades of the skyscrapers. In that stillness, I could feel the weight of the journey I had traveled, the heartbreak, the doubt, the nights spent questioning myself and the power I had forged from it. It was tempting, sometimes, to think back with bitterness, to dwell on Jordan, on the betrayal that had started it all, but I realized that resentment was wasted energy. The true victory wasn't in making them regret what they had done. It was in becoming someone untouchable, someone who moved through life with purpose and clarity. Dangerous, yes, but good. A force not of harm, but of self-respect and capability. Friends and colleagues often commented on the change, noting the subtle charisma, the quiet authority I seemed to carry effortlessly. But no one saw the countless hours of reflection, the practice, the small victories that built this new self. The transformation had been painstaking, born of patience, discipline, and a refusal to let heartbreak dictate my story. I thought of Samira and her words months ago. You're dangerous. Once you stop mourning what you lost and start claiming what's yours, people will notice. She had been right. Every lesson learned, every skill mastered, every act of composure and grace in the face of challenge had brought me to this moment. And it was intoxicating not because others admired me, but because I finally admired myself one evening. I attended a charity gala, not to prove anything to Jordan or anyone else, but because I wanted to celebrate life, influence, and the connections I had cultivated. As I entered the room, I noticed a hush, the subtle shift in attention toward me. Not arrogance, not showmanship, simply recognition. People gravitated toward my energy, responding to the calm confidence that had become my signature. Jordan was there, of course lingering in the background as if trying to gauge what had changed. But this time, I didn't hesitate, flinch, or even wonder what they thought. I carried myself with a poise that no longer needed their validation. Every glance, every word, every gesture conveyed a truth I had discovered long ago. I had survived. And I had thrived. Later, standing on the balcony overlooking the city skyline, the lights shimmering like distant stars on the river below, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. Heartbreak had been a teacher, betrayal, a sculptor, and from their harsh lessons, I had emerged unbroken and unstoppable. I realized that true danger, the kind that matters, isn't about intimidation or vengeance. It's about self-possession, clarity, and the ability to navigate the world with purpose and confidence. Life continued, full of opportunity and challenge. Invitations arrived, career doors opened, and personal connections deepened, not because I demanded recognition, because I had cultivated a presence that drew people naturally. I had become someone whose energy inspired respect, trust, and admiration. Dangerous, but good. And yet, there was room for love too. Not the desperate, clinging kind that once left me vulnerable. No, this love would be measured, intentional, and mutual. I understood now that to attract the right people, I needed first to inhabit my own power fully. Heartbreak had taught me that lesson with precision and clarity. At night, alone in my apartment, I sometimes smiled at the memory of how lost I had felt. Those nights of despair, those moments of weakness, they had all been necessary. Without them, I wouldn't have discovered this version of myself. Resilient, confident, composed, and magnetic. Pain had been the crucible, and out of it emerged a force no one could ignore. By the time I returned to the city streets during my morning run, I noticed the subtle difference in how people moved around me. A shopkeeper greeted me warmly, strangers offered smiles, and colleagues paused to acknowledge my presence. The world had shifted, not because it had changed, but because I had. I had grown, adapted, claimed the power that had always been within me. As I paused at the bridge overlooking the river, I whispered softly, almost to myself, I am dangerous. In the best way, it wasn't a boast. It wasn't a statement to the world. It was a truth I carried within, a declaration of resilience, mastery, and freedom. The breakup had made me, the betrayal had strengthened me, and the journey had transformed me into someone unstoppable. And in that moment, I understood the final lesson of all: power. When born from self-respect, clarity, and experience, doesn't seek to harm others. It commands life itself, and the world, inevitably, takes notice. Heartbreak had been the beginning, but the ending was mine too, right? And for the first time in years, I felt the exhilaration of knowing that my story, my dangerous, good story, was entirely my own.